Happy 4th of July!
Yay.
I feel like Mark Russell in one of those Mark Russell comedy specials. They were always on the 4th of July, weren't they? Oh, I was born in the land of cotton. All right, it is Monday, July 7th, 1986. You're still taller. It is Monday, July 7th, 1986, and we've watched episode 493 of Santa Barbara. Cece proposes to Sophia again. She turns him down. She says she doesn't like the way he's treating Mason, or in fact the way he's treating Ted. They decide to take things in another direction and pretend they just met. So Cece asks her out on a date.
That sounds like a lot of work.
I feel like, I was thinking about this, and I thought, oh, this is really clever of the writers. Because we probably don't want to see these two old people pretending to be teenagers in a flashback.
Mm-hmm.
So this way, they can relive, the viewers can relive their young romance, by having it sort of repeated in a way.
Yes. It just sounds like a lot of work.
Well, Cece's a rich guy, so it probably will involve something a little more fancy than taking her to La Mesa.
It seems like a lot of work if you were doing it when I consider ourselves trying to relive the last 20 years. And I just feel like it could be a lot of work for the viewers as well, unless it's handled well.
Cece finds Haley and Ted necking in the atrium, and he is not happy about that. An argument ensues, and Ted storms out. Back at the radio station, Haley hangs out in the booth while Ted is on the air. Roxanne calls and tells him the only thing she's wearing is a fur, nail polish, and a tan. This causes Ted to imagine Haley's dress disappearing and her hanging out there in her lingerie. After Roxanne hangs up, Haley teases Ted by doing an impression of Roxanne's voice. So that's kind of funny.
Mm-hmm.
Haley falls asleep, and Roxanne calls back and says maybe they should meet in person. Ted says he has a girlfriend, and Roxanne says, my last boyfriend had a girlfriend, and the one before that, and the one before that.
In the movie Play Misty for Me, Clint Eastwood's character goes on a date with Jessica Walter's insane character and then gets tired of her. I'm already tired of Roxanne.
Summertime is just beginning.
I find these sort of long, breathy, pretend sexy. That's when I start playing my game.
Well, I'm sure at some point they will meet, and we can see what her regular voice sounds like. Mary meets Mark at the Orient Express, and she tells him she's definitely getting a divorce. And she tells Mother Isabel the same. And like any good nun, she says, well, pray on it. But she doesn't try to talk Mary out of it. I think she realizes what a dire situation she's in with Mark. Mason talks about reopening the malpractice case against Mark and getting Janice to testify. We haven't seen Janice in a while. Mary says she can't deal with that, and Mason says that he'll go after Mark on his own. So I think that might drive a bit of a wedge between Mason and Mary if he goes it alone against Mark.
Not sure how much I care about Mason and Mary at this point.
Santana tells Keith she doesn't want to see him anymore. Keith is called away from the party because one of Cruz's men got injured. Cruz and Eden, as you might recall, are dancing on the beach at the beach bar. And he says Santana wants to make a go of it, and so does he. Having heard this number of times, Eden is not entirely really negatively affected by this, because I can just hear going, okay, well, just wait another week and see what happens.
Yeah.
Eden does point out that Santana's been spending a lot of time with Keith, and Cruz says, well, he knows her from school, and he's been really supportive with the problems with Danny. But then we get some nice backstory. He says that Keith First he says that he thinks that Keith has made a habit of making evidence disappear, and then he says, ever since high school, he's taken every chance he could to do me one better. Back at the Capwell house, Cruz tells Santana he straightened things out with Eden, which I don't know if Santana entirely buys. And then she mentions that Keith had to go to the police station because one of his men was hurt, and Cruz borrows Santana's car, and that's where we're starting to think, oh, is there going to be something with this new car? He's now driving Santana's car. Maybe someone will tamper with her brakes and Cruz will get injured instead, or someone will tamper with what they think is Cruz's brake and Santana will get injured instead. I don't know. When Cruz arrives, Keith is meeting with Officer Alvarez and another officer who seems to be the primary character of this scene, but whose name is not mentioned once. And that officer has his arm in a sling, so he's the injured one. And apparently an immigration raid netted only 2 people instead of the 30 or so. And I guess that's how the officer got injured. Keith says he's forming a task force and he wants Cruz to head it. Too many immigration raids have failed lately because someone is warning them. Immediately I'm thinking it's Officer Alvarez. It's interesting that they're going to do a storyline about immigration raids. So we saw one recently on Lou Grant from about 1978. So we'll see what the 1986 version of that is. Interesting having 2 Hispanic and 1 black officer on the immigration raid force. We will see how this is handled. Keith returns to the party but finds that it has ended. Cece reluctantly agrees to let him have a glass of champagne. I mean, Keith didn't see his face because he was heading for the bar already. And so just from his words, it sounded like Cece was inviting him in, but we could see Cece's face like, let's just get this guy out of our house. And then Eden gets an idea in her head. She asks Keith to go for a walk with her. She flirts with him and smiles, and when he finally leaves at the end of the day, her smile turns into a scowl. I think this was the one-upsmanship story of Cruz's that gave her this idea. I'm wondering if she's thinking, well, if Cruz isn't going to get back with me to save... Or if Cruz gets back with Santana to save her from Keith, maybe he'll get back with me to save me from Keith? I don't know exactly what the logic is, but...
Yeah, what is she playing at? I thought there were maybe a couple possibilities. Of course, we'll find out a little more as we get into the story. But I thought one thing was that she knows that, Cruz has been sort of struggling under Keith a little bit. So it might just be a very straightforward ploy to influence Keith a bit more and help Cruz. But it also made me think that she knows that Keith and Santana have been fooling around a little bit. And maybe she feels like Santana's jealousy of her is such that if she sees her with Keith, maybe Santana will make more of a play to break up Eden and Keith, and that will jeopardize her attempts at fixing the marriage with Cruz.
There are definitely a few different things that could happen out of this. So it's actually kind of exciting. I don't remember this at all. Cece asks her what kind of game she's playing, and she says, well, Cruz has done a lot for this family, so I'm looking out for him, which goes to what you were saying, maybe of her just wanting to make sure, Cruz doesn't get all on Keith's bad side. So, but I think there's more to it than that. So we'll see. And we had some full cast credits today. And we had all of the usual people in, but we had... there was once again a slash in Sophia Capwell-Armonti, but we have a new character. So we get to find out from the credits what our new police officer's name is. Paul Whitney is playing Stoney Jackson. Or Stoney Jackson is playing Paul Whitney. I'm not quite sure which way around it is. Stoney Jackson sounds more like a character's name, doesn't it? So I'll bet it's Stoney Jackson.
We'll see when someone finally refers to him by his name in the story.
Yes, and in the day players, or whatever it's called, guest cast, Mother Isabel, Priscilla Morrill, and Alvarez, played by Julio Medina. Alvarez is, of course, my suspect for who's tipping off the immigration targets. Alrighty, we'll be back after we watch the Tuesday episode, number 494. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 494 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Tuesday, July 8th, 1986. Dr. Rawlings says he's going to punish everyone for their very, very unauthorized 4th of July party. And during a session with Pearl, Dr. Rawlings starts to suspect that Pearl might be faking it. While Kelly draws him, Pearl tells her that Rawlings used to treat his brother, and that Rawlings might be onto him, so he's going to try to break into the file room tonight. So I think maybe Pearl sensed he was just overdoing it a bit in that session with Rawlings, and Rawlings picked up on that. He also at one point says, let's see about getting your memory back to Kelly, Pearl. Mm-hmm. So Pearl's doing some kind of work with Kelly that we haven't seen before, and Kelly seems a bit reticent to get her memory back, obviously. Mm-hmm. So, I think he was doing Woodrow Wilson at the start of the episode, and then later a cigarette and a holder magically appeared, and he was quoting Delano Roosevelt. So I think he was two people, but I might be wrong about the Woodrow Wilson. Might have been Roosevelt the whole time. Lionel tells Augusta that Grant left town without so much as a backward glance. At this point, I can reveal that we will never see the character of Grant Capwell again.
Interesting.
Yeah, at the time, we wouldn't have realized it. And it was so low-key that, the line when Grant said, I can do this without your help, the Lockridge help, and storms out, which was his last scene. And now Lionel just reiterating, nope, Grant's not coming back. After all the time of waiting to meet, more Capwells, he was only in 6 episodes.
Yeah, and you would think when you hire an actor like John Constantine, you'd want to have him stick around a little bit longer.
And the fact that in the next 6 or so years, none of the writers ever brought him back. It seems crazy that, here's someone at Cece's level. It's shocking that they never did. But if I had gotten a writing job on that, that's the first thing I would do, was bring him back. I don't know how many more mentions even we'll get of him. I mean, Courtney's still in town, so we may see her on the phone with him.
Yeah.
Maybe some occasional references when Pamela finally comes on the scene. But yeah, that's kind of weird. So we've seen 3 members of that Capwell East family, and one's dead and one's never coming back. So.
Yeah, it is too bad, and I think we talked about this a long time ago with the Jack Stanfield Lee character, and of course that character came to a premature end, I think, with the troubles that the actor was having. But that seemed to be set up at one point as being someone who could perhaps rival Cece in certain ways. So it is too bad we don't have a bit more of that dynamic on the show.
I started thinking with a couple of the recent things, maybe they got a new head writer, and they decided to change the ending of the David Laurent murder storyline and get rid of Grant. But when I looked, the new head writers don't come in until November of this year. So this is, I guess, the Dobsons. Maybe they did decide, maybe they did change their minds. Maybe they did decide to go another way with the Grant thing. Maybe the same thing could have happened with David Laurent, because as we said, the original movie that it's based on had a different ending. But yeah, that's interesting. Augusta says, well, we Lockridges can fight Cece by ourselves, even though I'm not a Lockridge, which gives Lionel an opening to ask her to marry him again. Lionel tells Cece that now that, after what he did to Warren, all his children are fair game. and Cece reminds them that they're at war. And then Cece says that Lionel probably murdered Madeline when this deal started to go awry. Augusta thinks it's a bad idea to go after Cece's children. And I'm thinking, well, is he going to go after Ted or Eden or Kelly? But actually, he starts with Mason because he's already got an idea for Mason, which is odd because of the one kid of Cece's who doesn't need any help, being used against Cece. It's already Mason. So, but he tells Augusta that all the paintings that she sold to Cece were fakes and that Mason knew about it the whole time. So Augusta briefly gets a chance to say, "You gave me fakes in the divorce settlement," but he promptly points out, "I tried for months to talk you out of taking those and taking cash instead." So that's kind of funny. So now we have an extra person who knows that. So those paintings, I guess, are still in play storyline-wise. I don't remember how that all pans out, and I don't imagine Cece sending Mason to jail if he finds out that Mason was involved in a fraud. But I don't know. We'll see. It's something I don't recall at all.
Yeah, it's interesting that is brought back. It's kind of nice to see a bit of that kind of continuity play through. I kind of feel like in blabbing about it, though, Lionel is kind of shooting himself in the foot a little bit, too. It was kind of perfect, I felt, the way it ended.
Yeah, because last year I thought that they had, they dropped the storyline and the paintings when Elizabeth left town. I thought, I wonder if they'll ever mention it again. So I was happy when it was brought up, and it did have a nice conclusion. But I guess it will continue on. Lionel's credit card was declined, so Augusta has to pay for the drinks. So I think whatever he's got planned, he's going to have to do it soon. But I'm wondering, does he get nothing from Grant from all this previous scheme? Like, is that totally dead? Because that was a big Grant scheme that was going to solve everything.
There was supposed to be a bit of a reason for Lionel taking all these risks. And if he didn't negotiate a bit of money out of it, it seems to be a lot of risk for not very much.
And now the only thing he had that he's been keeping all these years, all these documents aren't even worth anything.
Yeah.
And then Cece comes in with a worker, probably an architect, let's say, and he holds up some plans. And at first I thought, is he trying to taunt Augusta and Lionel with plans on what changes he's going to make to their house or something? But then I was able to see that it's actually a giant letter C on the plans. And Cece says, "Put it up on the roof. It should be seen from all over the city." So we're going to get a bit of an enhancement to that Capwell hotel roof set soon of a letter C. Presumably it'll light up if you want it to be seen across the city. So we may get a neon sign up there. Now we were just watching last week people on the roof of the building across from us. They had some construction materials on the roof for over a year, and I don't know if they had done elevator repairs or something. And we were wondering why that stuff was sitting there in the rain for so long. And then last week you pointed out it was being moved, and there was a crane on the street blocking all 3 right lanes of traffic on Georgia Street, which is Highway 99, right? So they're blocking half a highway for several hours to get that stuff off the roof. So I'm thinking they had to coordinate all that with the city to go block all that traffic and everything just to bring down, probably a couple of pallets of things. And sign related, last night there was a thing in the news about a Denny's sign being blown off a stand in the wind, and they said at the end it took them 4 hours for the crane to get it off the car. Unfortunately, a woman was killed in that. And I thought, why would it take 4 hours, But then when you look at these signs, they're made of like sheet metal, I guess, but they kind of look like tin, they look flimsy. So I imagine if you are lifting something with a crane that could potentially tear apart, even if it's welded together. It sounds like they have to be very careful. So in reality, Cece would probably have to block off the street for a day to get that sign up on the roof. They're certainly not going to take it in the elevator. But then again, he might do it BoJack Horseman style and have it helicoptered in. So We probably won't see any of the logistics of the sign actually being put up. I just imagine the first time we'll see it is when someone takes a smoke break from the reunion that will very likely happen at the Orient Express soon. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of budget they have to enhance that roof set on Santa Barbara. Days of Our Lives had an amazing roof set this week after years of people complaining about tiny sets. Looks like the whole studio was decked out to be the roof of the hospital on Days of Our Lives. I was shocked. It's like seems to be easily 5 or 6 times as big as the roof set we've ever seen on Santa Barbara, and I can't imagine it's more than 1 or 2 days. So, yeah, excited to see the roof enhanced on our show.
Actually, just getting back to signs, what CC's Big C reminded me of was something we saw in another building, which is just across the street from us, which was the former Trump Tower. We had a Trump Tower here in Vancouver. It's not an actual Trump-owned building. It was one that licensed his name, and it had a big granite T on it for quite some time. Of course, when he lost the election in 2020, they decided not to continue on with that licensing. And that big granite T actually disappeared pretty quickly. It went up pretty quickly and it went down pretty quickly. So, yeah, it's perhaps the C for the Capitol sign will be more like that. Maybe it'll just pop up one day and pop down the next.
I'm wondering if it'll look like the W on the Woodward's building that we had in Vancouver for many years, which was very lit up. It was kind of red or orange, I think. It was on the roof, and I think it spun. And one day I could see it from SFU when I was going there. It must have been a very clear night and a dead shot downtown. But the weird thing is, I didn't just see a blob. I could make out the W from that distance. So I think sometimes when the atmosphere is just right, you can get very clear images from very far away. So anyway, I doubt we'll see a shot of it from the street or from the beach or something. But anyway, looking forward to a big set piece. Mason tells Cece that Mary was raped by Mark. And then Mason has Mark arrested. Mark tries to hire Julia to defend him, and Augusta and I both had the same thought. Yeah. Oh, you're not going to defend another guy who turns out to be guilty, are you? Considering a nun is the one doing the accusing. So Augusta is appalled that she would even defend a rapist, but Julia points out he's only an accused rapist. I start thinking, oh, is Julia going to fall for Mark now? Mark tells Julia his side of the story, and she's very, impassive with this. And then Mason, says, I really want you to hear Mary's side of it. And Julia said, well, that's really, unorthodox to do it in this way, and I haven't even agreed to take Mark on yet anyway. So Mary tells her side of the tale, and then next time we see Mark come in there, he goes, well, are you going to take my case? And she says, yes. And that's when I was thinking, yeah, another replay of the David Laurent story. Augusta says, I'm absolutely astonished. I can't imagine Mary would lie. And Julia says, Mark was the one who's lying. I'm going to make sure he gets the worst legal advice money can buy. So she's going to get her revenge on David Laurent through Mark.
Yeah, who honestly does come across as an obnoxious jerk all through this.
Yeah.
I am a little worried about Julia because I think in some ways she's perhaps being a little too clever by half, because I don't think she fully appreciates how dangerous Mark possibly is. So I'm a little bit concerned that, he might try and do untoward harm towards her at some point, especially if he realizes her strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. This is another one of those storylines I don't remember how it plays out, so it'll be interesting to see. And that is it for the storylines this week. There were no credits on the version of Santa Barbara that we found online, so I don't know if there was anything new. And just I discovered that the producers of the James Bond movie are planning to announce the new James Bond towards the end of July. We'll
Wow.
find out who's going to be starring in The Living Daylights. And it's suspicious that they're waiting until the NBC's rights to Remington Steele completely expire in 2 weeks. So I have a good feeling that it's going to be Pierce Brosnan. So looking forward to that.
Now, ironically, in real time, we are once again in a situation where the Broccolis are looking for a new James Bond.
That's true, yeah. It's been over a year since No Time to Die came out. About a year, almost a year and a half. So
Yeah.
I had figured they were going to wait a year at least because, they're probably more concerned with promoting the actual movie and, with all the streaming and DVDs and things. I figured there'd probably be a year of promoting it throughout the world, and they wouldn't want to muddy the waters with the new James Bond. Because some people do complain when that happens with Doctor Who that the outgoing Doctor still has a few episodes left to air, and like all of the air is taken out of their final episodes because the BBC's announced the new Doctor already, and everyone's more excited about that. So I think it's good of them. It was good of them just to not, even if they were thinking about it, definitely didn't make any mentions of it yet. So we got that to look forward to at the end of July. And now we will be back after we watch episode 495 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 495 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Wednesday, July 9th, 1986. Due to his suspicions, Dr. Rawlings takes over Pearl's case completely. Kelly tries to back out of helping Pearl because she's worried about what Dr. Rawlings might do to all of them. So Pearl says, okay, well, if you can just get him to agree to do your session in your room instead of in his office, then his office will be clear for an hour or whatever. So she agrees to do that. And he breaks into the file room and finds Brian's folder, and he finds a stack of letters that his brother wrote to him all those years ago that Dr. Rawlings never mailed. So he starts reading one at the end of the episode. Meanwhile, Kelly has drawn Joe Perkins, and it is Mark Arnold instead of Dane Witherspoon. That was annoying. Dr. Rawlings looks at the drawings and notes that she's never drawn Nick. Kelly says, well, sometimes I see Nick in my head, but then I'm not sure if it's Joe. And then to keep Rawlings in the room a bit longer, she has to pretend that she remembers Dylan. So she kind of tricks him a bit, but I don't think she remembers Dylan really.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if she really did or not, because it seems like this great revelation at first, but then she can't really describe him and sort of backs off on it a little bit.
I think she remembers people asking if she remembers Dylan, and so that's probably what she's doing, which means she's still pretty bad off, really. Paul is the name of the new cop. So Stoney Jackson is the actor, and Paul, was it Whitfield or Winfield or something, is the character name. He's no longer wearing his arm in a sling after being shot yesterday. He tells Cruz he thinks Alvarez is the spy. Just as I thought. Alvarez calls Keith to say that Cruz and Paul are suspicious of him. And Keith finds the gun that shot Paul and assures Alvarez it's not the real gun. So this is a very steep turn for the character of Keith Timmons. Apparently he's involved in having one police officer shoot another. Is that what we're getting from this?
I guess so. I actually wasn't surprised that Keith was mixed up in this because we've already seen him sort of gleefully destroy evidence. So we know he's a pretty slippery character. But it'll be interesting to see just what it is he and Alvarez are really doing and how they're benefiting from this.
I mean, the one thing I can think is if they're like actively shaking down, businesses or hangouts where known illegal immigrants are going to be, and they're like, okay, if you pay us off, we'll give you a warning, but then they're actually the ones initiating these raids to begin with, so it's like they're self perpetuating, the necessity for the payoffs. That's something like that, maybe.
Like the mob with their protection money
Mm.
against the mob kind of thing.
Mhm.
Only it's police officers.
Yeah, so that's kind of a fun twist to this immigration story that I wasn't expecting. Keith tries to sit with Santana at the Orient Express, but she shoos him away, reminding him that she's not interested anymore, and Cruz is meeting her for lunch. So he has lunch with Eden instead, which annoys Santana, but annoys Cruz even more when he shows up. Keith tells Eden he's distracted too, because every time they turn around, member of her family or friend, shows up at their table. This kind of goes with the fact that everyone has lunch at the Orient Express that we've commented on before. She tells him, "You can relax, Santana already left." So she thinks that he's just as edgy, seeing Cruz and Santana together as Cruz was seeing Eden and Keith together.
And I just have to say, and we'll talk more about the Eden and Keith scenes because, of course, they're together more or less all episode. But I'm really, really enjoying the scenes between these two. The actors are both wonderful actors. There's many wonderful actors on the show, but Marcy Walker and the fellow who plays Keith are both very good. And it's just so fun to see these characters together because we know they're both playing a game. They know they're both playing a game. They don't know which game each other is playing, and neither do we. Mm-hmm. So it's really, really fun to watch the two of them trying to figure each other out, and us along with it, trying to figure out what each one is really trying to do. Mm-hmm. They're well matched.
Eden's flirting with him by playing with her champagne glass during one of the first scenes together. She seems to be doing a lot with that. Eden tells Lionel that his tab at the Orient Express is 3 times their maximum allowed, and he needs to pay up or leave. Rick tells Lionel, well, you shouldn't be surprised she's calling it in after what you just tried to do to her father. But Lionel says, "You've helped me make a decision," to Eden. So it sounds like he's now going to use her as the one to get at Cece. Lionel manages to get $50 out of Gina when he spots her wearing a brand new dress, but she's claims that she's got a lot of money tied up in the baking business, but she has a fistful of cash in her purse. And we'll find out what that dress is for in a few minutes, but he tells Gina that he's going to call in that loan unless she investigates Eden's past in Europe for him. He mentions to Brick ostensibly she was studying there, so but not a lot of word came back to Santa Barbara about exactly what she was up to. So this adds to my thought that Eden was in Europe for a few years, and there's a lot of potential for future stories to come out of that time that they could mine. Gina, he tells Gina he'll call in that loan unless she investigates Eden, and Gina is actually reticent to do that because she's kind of clinging to this thing that Eden was nice to her. Maybe that's her one link to the Capwells. But she can't resist when Lionel says, "All right, I'll clear the entire $5,000 loan if you do this for me." And so she reluctantly agrees, and Brick is not too happy to hear that Lionel is going after Eden.
Yeah, Lionel, in my opinion, takes a bit of a dark turn this episode because he's decided to go after the Capwells. And Brick sort of says to him, well, where will this end? And why are you doing this, basically? And reminds him that the Capwells are his family as well. So I do wonder if this will put a little bit of distance between Lionel and Brick. Mm-hmm. Maybe strain their relationship a little bit. Plus, I myself am sort of wondering why, apart from Lionel keeps saying he's trying to get to CC, it does seem to me that if he had managed things a bit better with Grant Capwell, he might have gotten a little farther with that aim than this sort of reckless targeting of CC's family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't remember where this goes, but interesting to see if he could dig up anything more than what seemed to be a pretty strong, scheme before with Grant.
Mm-hmm.
Eden mentions that it took almost an entire day to get the sea onto the roof of the Capwell Hotel. So that goes with our, witnessing of this street being blocked off for hours and hours, getting stuff moved off the building across the street. Gina pays the foreman to let her go up to the roof for an hour. He warns her to be careful as there are still some loose screws up there. She promises not to touch his precious sign. It's daytime on the roof. I don't know if we mentioned that last time, but we've got a nice, beautiful view of Santa Barbara in the background, whatever method they used to do that. And we get our first view of the giant letter C on the roof, and it's actually not one of those sheet metal signs that's totally closed in. It's more like a framework type sign, which when we first see it is all black. So I was like, oh, I hope there's some nice red lights, on there, but I couldn't really see any bulbs. But so it's kind of like more framework than a solid C, but it's pretty tall. I would say it's on a raised pedestal as well, but at least 10 to 15 feet, I would say, tall.
Yeah, it's like a neon sign, I guess.
Yeah, and it looks like it's raised a bit so that it'll, when it's beaming its light across the city, it'll clear the edge of the roof a bit. So, yeah, not as big as I had in my head, but impressive enough, I would say. Gina is shooting a commercial on the roof, and she is lip-syncing to a studio-recorded version of her big hit jingle, Mommies and Daddies, Copies and Bookies, all love Mrs. Capwell's cookies. Mm-hmm. The director's a bit annoyed with her for flubbing it a couple times. He goes, we only got one more take. We only have an hour. And then Gina decides that maybe they can zhuzh it up a bit by having the lights on the Capwell Sea get turned on right at the finale. And the director apparently agrees with this. He pulls the switch at the appropriate time and immediately gets electrocuted.
Now, I'm
not
assuming
to death, but he gets a very bad shock.
I'm assuming this is not the big shock you were warning me about.
It is not.
It is a shock, though.
It is a shock. But there will be a bigger one. Let's put it that way. The lights go out in the Orient Express, and the foreman goes, I told that lady to stay away from the sign. What lady? You Mrs. Capwell. So he races up to the roof and kicks Gina off, and the director leaves shouting that he's going to sue Gina. And Gina defends her use of the roof, saying, for those of us who have not had everything handed to us, we have to scramble. And Eden said, just do it somewhere else. Gina says, I'm going to get back everything that was taken from me and more.
As we've heard her say many times.
Too bad Gina didn't get the shock. She could sue the Capwell hotels. Keith asks Eden to dinner, since he had gotten diverted back to the office in the midst of their lunch. She says that they have a minor electrical problem on the roof and she can't leave until it's repaired. So he offers to hang out on the roof with her. And he looks at the faulty electrical panel, and Eden warns him it might still be electrified. Keith says the new sign will look great when it's lit up. He kisses Eden, and Gina tells Cruz that Eden and Keith are on the roof. And Cruz comes through the door just in time to witness the wind blowing through Eden and Keith's hair as they hold each other, like the cover of a romance novel. Cruz tells Eden that Keith is dangerous. I told you that before. And she says, I have a father. She says, yes, I know. And you don't even know how dangerous. It's a little part of Eden's little thing that she's playing. So you get triple meaning in there, I guess. Mm-hmm. Anyway, yeah, I'm really enjoying Keith and Eden, which is a pairing I had totally forgotten about too. So, yeah, hope we get some more fun stuff on the roof while the weather's nice and the wind is balmy, and get a nice big backdrop of a beautiful Santa Barbara sky. And that is it for a Wednesday episode. Maybe we'll have a bigger shock tomorrow.
Oh, maybe.
Did you have anything more to say about that scene? I mean,
no, just that it was a lot of fun, and as you say, I don't know if they use projection technique or whatever, but you actually get the whole Santa Barbara kind of skyline in the background, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm. I have a very good feeling we'll be up on that roof again tomorrow when we watch episode 496. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 496 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Thursday, July 10th, 1986. And I dug into my archives to find my Bob Newhart ticket from when I went to Expo, and I was actually quite surprised that I had seen Bob Newhart on May 24th. I had thought it was later in the summer. And you can see it was $19 and $1 surcharge by Ticketmaster, so that was pretty steep. So I drove to Vancouver that day to attend Expo. That was my one day I attended Expo. Stayed over at my old place where I used to live, and Bob Newhart came on, I think, at 10, and then at 10 o'clock there was a problem. And we sat till midnight. And then at midnight was the fireworks that happened every night at Expo, so we had to wait for those to be over. So anyway, the Bob Newhart concert ended at 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really know that part of Vancouver. And certainly the Expo site wouldn't have been something I could have wandered around while I was, going to SFU at the first part of the year. So I was trying to find the bus to get back to my house, my former roommate's basement suite. And I walked and walked and walked, and years later I figured out what road I actually was on, that I had crossed the Georgia Viaduct, and at one point I'm like, I'm going in the wrong direction, or parallel to Hastings Street, so I took a road at random, which was Clark Drive. Now, if you have any idea of how far Clark Drive is from Expo, I walked quite a ways. And I got up to Hastings, and my legs were, after a day at Expo and an hour of walking to find a bus, my calves were in excruciating agony and seizing up. And I was leaning against this bus pole, and a bus came by, and it was full, so it passed me by at 3 in the morning. So I had to wait for another one that had enough room for one more person to take me back to my home. So that was my one day at Expo. And did you say you attended it more than once? Or?
Yeah, I think I attended it probably about half a dozen times. I don't actually have great stories from it like you do. I just remember going and there being a lot of crowds and attending various pavilions. And of course the big thing was they were introducing this little SkyTrain line between downtown and the site, and that became Vancouver's main public transit system eventually. So, lots of innovations that came out of that, but I don't actually have any good stories from it like you do.
All right. Pearl tells Kelly about Brian's letters, and he says that he had always thought Brian killed himself and blamed Pearl. But the letters don't show him blaming Pearl at all. In fact, they have positive things. I think he actually says, I don't blame you. But also, some of the letters are dated awfully close to the time that Brian's suicide was reported to the family by Dr. Rawlings. And Pearl says this does not sound like someone who is suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
So we may have what I'm thinking is Dr. Rawlings' therapy, shock therapy or something, may have actually killed Brian, and he covered it up as a suicide.
I think that is the obvious conclusion at this point. Now, I was thinking to myself, wouldn't it be fun, and of course the story doesn't support this at all, but just wouldn't it be fun if Pearl was actually someone who had multiple personality syndrome and he was actually Pearl Brian?
Oh my God, that would
Wouldn't
be
that be
incredible.
fun?
We had a voiceover when he was reading letters of an actor doing the voice of Brian. So we actually have a casting for Brian. Maybe we'll get some flashbacks at
I
some
know
point.
he and Sheila were reminiscing about Brian. Plus, if he was the one actually being treated by Dr. Rawlings, I think Dr. Rawlings would have recognized him.
That would be an
But it
interesting twist.
just occurred to me that would be
Yeah.
really fun. And then he ended up killing Madeline as one of his other personas.
Oh wow, this could be
See,
a
I
whole
should
alternate
write-
universe
I
Santa
should write
Barbara.
for these, yeah.
Courtney sneaks in another disguise, a cross between Madonna and Marilyn Monroe, I think she said. So Kelly lends them her bed for some alone time. Kelly tells Pearl about a dream she had involving a jukebox that Joe gave her, and Pearl gets Courtney to search Kelly's bedroom and bring the jukebox. But instead of making Kelly happy, it makes her sad because she remembers that Joe is dead. Ted visits Kelly and smuggles in a little transistor radio and says, every day at noon, I'm going to broadcast a special message for you. And so she has it on in the break room at noon, and he says hi to Kelly, and he plays If Ever You're in My Arms Again by Peebo Bryson. And Kelly looks up and says, I do remember. So what does she remember?
We will find out, I'm sure.
I don't know if it's everything or just something about Joe.
Yeah, maybe she'll remember Gina being in the room.
Oh, yes, maybe.
I don't know if it was my imagination or not, but I thought things had actually cooled a little bit between Courtney and Pearl in this episode. I don't know if it was because he was so intent on the letters that Brian had left, or if he's starting, like every man who ever enters the show, to develop feelings for Kelly, which is possible too.
I mean, that's definitely a potential here. Yeah, I think she was a little bit concerned that he was more excited about Brian's letters than her visit. So maybe it was just that. Jane is annoyed to hear that Haley is planning to make dinner for Ted tonight, and has one of her little talks about not being a slave. Ted tells Jane that he's surprised at Mary's allegations and Mark. I mean, I know the guy. This is not exactly the right thing to have said in front of Jane, that's for sure. And Jane goes to interview Mason, Mary, Mark, and Julia. And there's another reporter from somewhere else there, too. So we're seeing a lot of news journalism work by Jane, actually, this last few days. And Mason is shocked to find out that Julia is representing Mark. And, he says, didn't you listen to what Mary said? Anyway, Julia, of course, has to put him off because she's not really representing Mark. And Augusta's there the whole time. You're going to lose your license. And similar to the last time where we saw them rehearsing their closing statements, this time we see Mason rehearsing Mary's testimony. And at the end of it, she tells them that she's had enough of this and she isn't going to testify. Now, usually when they show you something before something is supposed to happen, that means it's not going to happen. So I think this may well be that Mary just completely refuses to testify against Mark. And, potentially Mark could go free as a result of that. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, Mary is rehearsing, Mark is rehearsing his testimony with Julia. And he suddenly becomes really suspicious by the fact that she's going to put him on the stand. He says, "There's the one thing I know about the law is you don't put the defendant on the witness stand if you can avoid it." And she tries to smooth it. Oh no, I know what I'm doing. I mean, that's how you convinced me. You've got to let the jury see what you're doing, David. And then he says, "Oh, you just called me David." I said, "Oh, that was an accident." He ends up flipping through her notes that she has in a folder on the table, and he says, "This is David Lorent's file. There's nothing here about my case at all. Why are you lying to me?" So he gets really angry that Julie's lying to him, and I think he'll put things together almost very quickly, especially with the David folder giving him a clue as to what might be going on in her head.
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone knows what happened with David. I don't know if it's publicized how it ended there, but, maybe Mark has a sense. So anyway, during this episode, Mark has gotten fired, and they threatened to suspend his medical license, until the trial is over. So things are not going well for him. So he's got nothing to lose in a way. So Who knows what he could do?
Yeah.
Reading the copy that Haley wrote for him without going over it first, Ted announces to the world his undying love for Haley, which causes Haley to snicker. This prompts Roxanne to call in and suggests that they meet at the theater. I think it's the Ridge Theater, she says. It's just that theater that we saw before. I think when Peter Flint was skulking around behind someone. Ted goes to the theater, but then starts thinking, oh, Haley's at home cooking me dinner, and I'm here trying to meet Roxanne. So he leaves seconds before Roxanne walks in. And we see everything but her head.
And I actually loved the fact that he came in and he sat down and he looked around and there's just this one guy there. And he kind of looks at him like, is this the person? No, I guess not.
That could be a funny...
But it was
Nowadays,
funny
that's
that
a
he
bit
would
funny.
even kind of consider it, I guess in light of the whole Lindsay Smith thing, that it's possibly an option.
Okay, see, it's another alternate universe.
And truly, we haven't seen Roxanne yet.
That's
so we
true.
don't know.
It could be a guy in disguise. Could be David Laurent in disguise. And that is it for this episode. So I guess something shocking is going to happen tomorrow. What do you think it is?
I don't know. I thought maybe that sign will cause the Capwell Hotel to burn down, but we've already seen it burn, so, I mean, that's not really a thing anymore. It's possible that something will happen with the trial. Maybe Mark will attack Julia or something like that, but I don't know if that's really shocking enough. I was thinking maybe it would be in association with Madeline's murder that we would find out who killed her, and it would be someone completely shocking, which is what got me thinking of all the possibilities with Pearl. But no, I don't actually know.
All right. Well, we're going to find out very soon because we're going to watch Santa Barbara right after we finish recording. So we will see you in 2 minutes for episode 497 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 497 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Friday, July 11th, 1986. The wind starts to blow on the roof of the Capwell Hotel as Eden and Cece check out the new sign. Now, I have to say, I remembered the sign in my head being bigger. It's actually a little disappointingly small. But it's all lit up and nice and red. And I guess the important thing is it can be seen throughout the town.
Yeah, it's not big, and it's honestly a bit crappy looking.
A worker who is tightening the bolts decides to call it a day and puts up a caution sign on the sawhorse, which is promptly blown off by the wind. I think originally, because I was listening to it on audio, I would have missed the episode where Cece had the plans for it, and I didn't realize that they had just put the sign up there this week. Because when Eden tells whoever, oh, it took a whole day to get up there, that's not necessarily today. That could have been 20 years ago, right? And so I had thought that it was the C in the word Capwell. I thought that the entire roof said Capwell Hotel. Because I had just listened to it on audio. So I was a bit surprised that it was just a C. And maybe that's why it seemed a little small too. Because if it was part of a big, thing, it would have been a good size. But if it was the only letter, maybe it should have been bigger. Cruz, Paul, and Alvarez make another raid and find no one. Alvarez calls Keith to say that they suspect him. And Keith says, let them suspect you all they want. Cruz says they're going to do another raid, but let's all stick together until then. And Alvarez says, sounds good. Can I have some privacy so I can phone my wife? So Paul and Cruz go outside and listen in on Cruz's secretary's phone. And guess what? Alvarez calls someone in Spanish that is clearly not his wife. And caught, Alvarez admits that he reports to someone known only as El Blanco. I can't help but think that means white.
Yes.
So I immediately thought, could it be Keith? And we have seen Keith speaking Spanish in the past. But I have to say, it didn't sound like Keith when they were listening on the speaker. Cruz wonders if that someone could be in the DA's office. But, Alvarez tries to actually lead them down another path by saying, oh, I think it's another cop somewhere. As he is only 1 month from retirement, he begs Cruz not to turn him in. And Cruz basically says, well, just don't come to work anymore, basically. He lets him off pretty easy. CC says he knows Eden's up to something with Keith Timmons. Keith asks Eden to the symphony, and there's a little scene where they compete over who has the best seats, because she already had tickets. Eden overhears Keith chewing out Cruz on the phone, and, she's trying to figure out how to help Cruz. So when Keith mentions that he can see the new Capwell sign from his office, Eden says, oh, maybe I could come to your office and check it out from there. While Eden's there, Keith brings Cruz in and says, oh, maybe you're the one who's tipping off the illegal immigrants. Did your parents come over here on foot, or did they swim? Which, of course, does not sit well with Cruz.
No.
Eden snoops through Keith's files, and when Alvarez calls, she takes a message. She listens at the door when Keith calls out Alvarez back and hears Keith say that you should never have left your number with Eden, and don't ever call me again. Then later, Eden finds a crumpled piece of paper next to Keith's trash can. Now, I'm not sure if Keith left that as a plant, because I think at one point he thought maybe Eden was listening at the door, but she hid behind a pillar. So I don't know if that's going to be a useful piece of paper, or this will be Keith is one step ahead of Eden.
I feel like they're going to be playing games with each other for the length of their relationship, whatever it is. We'll see.
Mark realizes that Julia was just trying to get Mark convicted. Mark says that he can get her disbarred. And then she has something else she counters with that I can't quite remember. Mary reminds Mason that he said that in the Capwell household, the children learn revenge first, and she's tired of it. Mason says if they don't put Mark away, he might win custody of the baby. Julia asks Mary to meet her at the Orient Express, and then there's some very scary music played. She leaves a note for Mason. Cece tells Mary it's her choice if she doesn't want to prosecute Mark. Mark asks to talk to Mary privately, and she suggests that they should go up onto the roof. Mary tells him that she won't prosecute if he signs away parental rights, which he agrees to. And also, you have to admit that you raped me. And that he does not agree to. In fact, he becomes furious. Cece tells Julia that Mary and Mark are on the roof. The wind is shaking the sign, and that loose bolt that the guy didn't quite tighten at the beginning comes out, and the other bolts start to shake loose. Julia tells Mary not to drop the charges against Mark. People like Mark and David need to go to jail. Mark tells Mary that Julia tried to set him up. Everyone is shouting at this point because the wind is starting to be quite noisy now. Mason finds Mary's note, and Cece tries to keep Mason from going up on the roof, and tells him that he should spare Mary the agony of a trial. Cece says, I feel partially responsible for encouraging her to choose him in the first place. I think Mason is going to hold Cece even more responsible. Julia and Mark stand back facing Mary as she backs up against the big sea. The bolts shake loose one after the other, and the cables holding the sign in place start to snap one by one. Mary shouts that she'll live alone with her baby if she has to. Julia says it's too windy up here, and we should all go back downstairs. When the last cable snaps and the sign topples over towards Mary.
Just as Mason arrives.
Fade to black. I thought the sign was bigger. What do you think is going to happen?
I think minimally Mary will have a miscarriage, which is always sort of convenient in these stories. Maximally, she'll be fatally injured, perhaps, or at least incapacitated.
I feel like her losing the baby would drastically change the Mark dynamic too. He's got nothing really now to hold over either of them. So I think, as a long-time soap opera fan, I think that baby is definitely not going to be born.
I think it would be quite funny if they all banded together, Mason, Mark, and Julia at least, to sue Cece for the general crappy condition of his building.
Well, there was a caution sign floating around on that roof somewhere. And that is it for the most shocking episode ever of Santa Barbara. Diane wasn't as shocked. I thought it was a bigger sign. Julio Alvarez is played by Julio Medina, and Christine, who I didn't mention, but she is Keith Timmons' secretary, is played by Mary Elena Beer. And next week we only have 4 days of Santa Barbara because Thursday NBC is airing the Daytime Emmys. So maybe if anything Santa Barbara related happens in there, we'll mention it in between the Wednesday and the Friday show. And that is it for the most exciting week ever of Santa Barbara. We'll be back next week for week 103. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
A little bit bigger. Yeah, I think that's fine. Put it up on the roof. Should be seen all over the city.